At some point in your life, you failed at something that mattered. Maybe it was a business. Maybe it was an investment. Maybe it was a job you lost, or an opportunity you missed, or a decision you made that cost you more than you want to think about. And when it happened, you did what most people do. You felt it. You processed it. You told yourself the story everyone tells themselves. Failure is part of the journey. Every successful person has failed. Get back up and try again. Good advice. Completely useless. Because here is what nobody tells you after they hand you that advice. What exactly do you do with the failure? Not how do you survive it emotionally, not how do you recover psychologically, but what do you actually do with it? Because the wealthy do something very specific with failure. Something almost nobody talks about. Something that has nothing to do with resilience or grit or bouncing back. And once you see it, you will understand why some people fail forward into wealth while most people just fail. Let me show you what I mean. There is a man named James, 31 years old, first business failed after 14 months, lost $40,000, not borrowed money, his own savings, 4 years of working extra shifts, skipping holidays, saying no to everything that cost money, gone in 14 months. Most people around James expected him to be devastated. He was for about a week, but then James did something unusual. He sat down with a notebook and spent 3 days doing something most people never do after a failure. He conducted an autopsy, not an emotional processing session, not a journaling exercise about his feelings. A cold, detailed, surgical examination of everything that went wrong. Every decision he made, every warning sign he ignored, every moment where the data told him something different from what he wanted to believe, he wrote it all down. Not to punish himself, to extract the intelligence, because James understood something most people don't. A failure that is not studied is a failure that will repeat. But a failure that is studied completely becomes the most valuable education money can buy. Therefore, James treated that $40,000 loss not as the end of a story, but as the most expensive lesson he had ever purchased. And he was determined to get every single cent of value out of it. 3 years later, he launched his second business. It succeeded, not because he was luckier, not because the market was better, because he had already made every major mistake once and documented exactly what it looked like. He recognized the warning signs before they became disasters. He made different decisions at the exact moments where he had made wrong ones before. His failure had become his competitive advantage. And that is the first thing wealthy people do with failure that most people never do. They study it like a scientist instead of surviving it like a victim. Most people move through failure as fast as possible. Get past it. Put it behind you. Stop thinking about it. Move on. And that impulse makes complete sense emotionally. Failure is painful. The brain wants to escape pain. But in rushing past the failure, most people leave behind the most valuable thing the failure had to offer. The data, the specific, actionable, brutally honest information about exactly what does not work, exactly where the gaps in their thinking are, exactly which assumptions they made that turned out to be false. Wealthy people slow down at failure. They lean into it. They ask uncomfortable questions. What did I know that I ignored? Where did I prioritize what I wanted to be true over what was actually true? What would I do differently if I could go back to day one? And then they write the answers down, not to feel better, to get better. Now here is the second thing, and this one is more counterintuitive. Wealthy people share their failures faster than most people share their successes. Think about that for a second. Most people hide failure. It feels like weakness. It feels like evidence that they are not capable. It feels like something to be managed and minimized and kept private until the success story makes it acceptable to mention. But wealthy people have figured out something the average person misses completely. Failure openly shared becomes currency. When you share a failure honestly, what went wrong, what you learned, what you would do differently, 3 things happen simultaneously. First, you build trust with everyone around you in a way that success stories never can. Because everyone has failed. And someone who talks about failure honestly feels real in a world full of people performing success. Second, you attract people who have solved the problem you failed at. Because knowledge finds honesty. People who have the answers you need are far more likely to offer them to someone who has admitted they need them. Third, you lock the lesson in permanently. The act of articulating a failure out loud, of turning it into a coherent narrative with a clear lesson, converts the experience from something that happened to you into something you understand. Therefore, the failure becomes an asset instead of a liability. Therefore, the people around you become resources instead of judges. And that compounding effect, the trust, the knowledge, the locked-in lesson, is worth more over time than almost any single success. A woman I know lost her first investment completely, $15,000 into a deal that collapsed within 6 months. Her first instinct was to never talk about it, but she forced herself to write about it publicly. Exactly what happened, exactly what she missed, exactly what she would look for differently next time. Within 2 weeks, 3 experienced investors had reached out to her directly, not to criticize her, to respect her honesty, to share what they had learned from similar experiences. 2 of those conversations directly informed the investment strategy that made her first significant return 18 months later. The failure she was ashamed of became the bridge to the knowledge she needed, because she shared it instead of hiding it. Now here is the third thing, the deepest one, the one that separates people who build long-term wealth from people who try and quit. Wealthy people do not let failure become identity. This sounds simple. It is not, because the way the human brain processes repeated failure is deeply personal. When something goes wrong once, most people think I made a mistake. When it goes wrong twice, they think I am unlucky. When it goes wrong 3 times, something shifts. They stop thinking about the failures as events. They start thinking about the failures as evidence. Evidence of who they are. Evidence of what they are capable of. Evidence that wealth is something that happens to other people. And once failure becomes identity, every new attempt carries the weight of every previous failure. The decision is no longer just about this opportunity. It is about whether someone like me deserves to succeed. Wealthy people interrupt this process deliberately. They have trained themselves to maintain a hard psychological separation between what happened and who they are. A failed business is something that happened. It is not a statement about their capability. A bad investment is information about that specific decision. It is not a verdict on their intelligence. A missed opportunity is a data point. It is not proof of their worth. This separation is not natural. It is a skill, built deliberately over time, through the practice of asking one specific question every time something goes wrong. Not, what does this say about me? But what is this teaching me? 4 words change to 4 different words. And the entire psychological experience of failure shifts. From personal verdict to useful information. From evidence of limitation to instruction for growth. James, the man from the beginning of this video, told me once that the $40,000 failure was the best thing that ever happened to his financial life. Not because losing $40,000 felt good, but because it taught him things about himself, about business, about decision-making under pressure that no amount of success could have taught him at that speed. He said the failure was expensive, but ignorance would have been more expensive. And that is the truth most people never reach, because they move past their failures too quickly to study them. They hide their failures too carefully to learn from sharing them, and they let their failures become their identity before they can become their education. So the next time you fail at something that matters, and you will, because everyone does, do not just survive it. Use it. Sit with it long enough to extract everything it has to offer. Share it honestly enough to attract the knowledge it can unlock. And refuse to let it tell you who you are, because failure has never determined anyone's financial future. The only thing that has ever determined that is what they decided to do with it. If this changed how you see your own failures, hit subscribe right now. Because we go deeper than anyone else into the psychology behind wealth, success, and the invisible decisions that change everything. Comment the word autopsy if this shifted something in you. Because the people who study their failures are already thinking differently from everyone else. And that difference is where everything begins. Failure was never the thing that stopped people from becoming wealthy. It was always what they decided failure meant.